Hello everyone, Archana is here. Welcome to the third session of presentation, ICSE Class 9, Paper 2, Literature in English. In today's class, let us learn the poem, The Cold Within, written by James Patrick Kinney. About the poet, James Patrick Kinney was born on 15 January 1932 in Cleveland, Ohio. He spent 10 years at the St. Charles Seminary in Ohio, following which he decided to join the military. Kinney studied the Burmese language at the Defense Language Institute in Monterey before taking up a position in Okinawa, Burma. Following his military service, he worked as a teacher, a profession which helped him stay in touch with his interest of writing and storytelling. Kinney has written a couple of poems which reflect his positive credo towards life. Some of these poems include The Cold Within, The Secret of Life, and A Better World, among others. Kinney suffered a massive heart attack in 1948, which was followed by a number of strokes. He had to give up his career and was forced more than 8 final years of his life at Monterey Care Center. He passed away on 12th August 2007. Irish-American poet James Patrick Kinney uses his poetic parable, The Cold Within, to illustrate the folly of falling prey to discrimination that shortchanges our own humanity, which is written in the 1960s during the African American Civil Rights Movement, that is 1954 to 1968. Kinney was outraged by inhuman discriminatory attitudes at the time and wrote this poem to prompt some serious soul searching. How often are we wise enough to rise above our egos? How foolish are we when we give in to our prejudices? Its message is relevant even today when we face divisive outlooks in the world that lead to hatred and violence. The poem is a reminder to overcome our personal demons and be open to the wisdom of an egalitarian view, an attitude where everyone is considered equal in worth. Kinney's narrative poem tells a story to protest against bigotry and racism. The poem comprises of 8 quatrains, that is 4 lines per stanza. The original citation of the poem, The Cold Within, is unavailable, but a letter from Kinney's widow at an advice column tracks the interesting story behind its distribution. It seems that Kinney submitted the poem to many publications, but it was rejected as being too controversial for the time. Still, the poem, with its compelling message, spread quietly, shared in gatherings, over the radio and other information channels. Somewhere in this, the authorship of James Patrick Kinney was lost, and for a few decades, the source was cited as anonymous. Kinney's wife and son, however, brought his contribution to light. In the early 2000s, the Ligurian, an American-based Catholic magazine, became the first commercial publication to publish this poem while correctly accrediting the author. Now, let's deal with the poem. First stanza. 6 humans trapped by happenstance in bleak and bitter cold. Each one possessed a stick of wood, or so the story is told. The poem begins with the narrator telling us about 6 humans who were trapped by happenstance. Here, the meaning of the word happenstance means coincidence. So, 6 humans are trapped by coincidence in a bleak and bitter cold. The cold, hopeless setting is instantly sketched by the use of the alliteration bleak and bitter. The word meaning alliteration is repetition of sound. Here, bleak and bitter. B sound is repeated in these two words in the same line. In bleak and bitter cold. Bleak and bitter. An important feature of the first stanza is the use of the term humans. 6 humans trapped, because that is what the 6 people are, first and foremost. Before they are the members of one race or the other, one creed or the other, they are human beings. They are human beings who have physical and emotional needs and who are susceptible to both hatred and cold. Unfortunately, the failure on their part of this basic fact becomes a cause of their doom. Each one of them has a stick of wood. This wood isn't merely a physical object, but is symbolic of a resource or potential that all human beings possess. It is our willingness to use what we have for the sake of others that will keep the fire burning. Here, the story is told implies that the speaker has heard it from somewhere else, which makes this a part of oral parables and folk wisdom. We open up to a bleak tableau. The poet recounts a tale he has heard of 6 persons caught together in the grip of a severe winter. Each of them probably had a single stick of wood. Note, the poet is using of the word humans. He wants to draw attention to the gathering as specific individuals rather than as a collective group. They were trapped by happenstance, implying no escape from a situation created by chance. The adjectives dark and bitter describing the cold add to the ominous feeling. Here, ominous means something bad is going to happen. So, these adjectives, that is dark and bitter, which describes the cold, tells us that something bad is going to happen. Second stanza. Their dying fire in need of logs. The first man held his back, for on the faces around the fire, he noticed one was black. The second stanza cuts into a key character in the story, the dying fire. The group's prospects did not look good. In the heart of winter, keeping warm is critical to survival. The fire offers a chance of salvation if each person would use their respective logs to feed it, respective wood to feed it. The dying fire is a silent appeal to the group to help themselves by helping each other. The next verses reveal how the situation unfolds. We find that the first person withheld his log from the fire only because it would benefit a black person. This is racism, where there is discrimination because of a person's race. The man will not even warm himself if someone he looks down upon, simply because of skin color, will gain. So, in this stanza, the fire was slowly dying out and was in need of firewood. However, the first person did not put his log into the fire because when he looked at his companions, he noticed one of them was black. We will see how his racist attitude poisons the mind of his victim and how this racist attitude of his will backfire on him. This stanza brings to the fore a literary device of foreshadowing. The dying fire not only presents a particular condition but also foreshadows the fate of the characters. One moment it is a dying fire, and the other moment it is people dying. Third stanza. The next man, looking across the way, saw one knot of his church and couldn't bring himself to give the fire his stick of birch. So, what happened here? The second person looked across the fire and saw someone who he knew didn't share his religious ideology. And just because of that, he can't bear to give up his log to the communal fire. This is bigotry, which speaks of intolerance to a person because they do not share the same opinions or ideas. So here in this stanza, the next man looked around and saw that one person in the group did not belong to his church or religion, and he held back his stick of birch wood. He is a religious bigot, plain and simple, and discriminates anybody who doesn't share the same religious views as his. Fourth stanza. The third one sat in tattered clothes. He gave his coat a hitch. Why should his log be put to use to warm the idle rich? The focus now shifts. Here is a person who seems poor. His tattered clothes, means old and torn clothes in the cold weather, hint at poverty. He perhaps felt the cold more than the others, as we notice that he gave his coat a hitch, means adjusting it closer to his body to ride out some warmth from the inadequate clothing. But here too is a dead end. We see that he is a victim of classism or discrimination based on social or economic class, considering those favorably placed than him to be idle. He is defensive, and in his eyes, the rich do not deserve his meager ration, and he will not part with his stick. So here, the third person was poor man, wearing torn and tattered as he was very poor. He pulled his coat to warm himself and thought, why should he put his log into the fire to warm the lazy rich people? He too held back his firewood. Fifth stanza. The rich man just sat back and thought of the wealth he had in store and how to keep what he had earned from the lazy, shiftless poor. At cross purposes, we find the next exhibit of apathy. The rich man, caught up hoarding his riches in his head. He is oblivious to reality. Greed blinds him as he selfishly connives to keep his wealth. He even miserably holds on to his stick, keeping it from the poor whom he perceives as aimless and lazy. So here, the fourth was a rich man and thought only of his wealth he had accumulated and of how might he keep his riches away from the hands of the lazy and idle poor. As a result of his mistrust and prejudice, he too held back his firewood. It is interesting to see that both the rich and the poor keep their firewood to themselves due to the same underlying prejudice. Both consider each other to be lazy and idle folks. Perhaps both are wrong. These stanzas show how prejudices keep or develop when people are isolated from others who do not belong to the same racial, economic, or religious group that they belong to. So, students, here we shall stop for this session, and the remaining stanzas will be explained in the next session. And even the figures of speech used in the poem, the title of the poem, and about the theme of the poem also will be explained in the coming session. And your home assignment is you have to write the summary for these 5 stanzas by listening to this video. Thank you all.